Hello everyone. First of all, I would like to start by thanking for joining us. My name is Filipe Assunção and I am a PhD student from the University of Coimbra in Portugal. We'll be presenting our work submitted to EuroGP on the incremental evolution and development of deep artificial neural networks. Our motivation for conducting this research is based on the difficulty in generating and building deep artificial neural networks, which is often based on a trial and error process, which is burden, time consuming, and provides no assurance of deploying the best model. To optimize this, we can use automated machine learning approaches, which NeuroEvolution is an example of. However, NeuroEvolution is often known for being slow and requiring too many computational resources. And the reason for that is that as a process that is based on evolutionary computation, we need to access the quality of the candidate solutions, which often involves training the neural networks that are generated throughout evolution, which, as we know, when dealing with deep artificial neural networks, is very costly and time demanding. On top of that, the majority of NeuroEvolution methods only address a specific problem. That is, the artificial neural networks are evolved for one specific task, and when there is a need to solve a new problem, the entire procedure has to be restarted from scratch. That is, there is no reuse of knowledge that a priori gathered when solving other problems, and we are always restarting from scratch every single time we want to optimize a neural networks for a different problem, or when we are trying to optimize a different type of structure for the same problem. To deal with this, we introduce incremental learning to NeuroEvolution, and incremental learning is based on the transfer and reuse of the knowledge that is acquired when optimizing deep artificial neural networks to previous problems. That is, we want to be able to identify and reuse parts of the architectures and learning that can be cumulatively applied to search and to solve problems that are more challenging. In the particular case of this paper, we apply incremental learning and development to a NeuroEvolution framework known as Fast Deep Evolutionary Network Structure Representation. FastDenser is a general-purpose grammar-based NeuroEvolution approach that can optimize effectively deep artificial neural networks. FastDenser generates fully trained networks, that is, the networks that are generated by FastDenser do not require further training after the end of the evolutionary process. In particular, FastDenser can optimize the layer types, their sequence with connectivity, and hyperparameters. That is, for example, if you are talking about a convolutional neural network, you want to optimize where to place convolutional and pooling layers, and what are the right parameters for a given convolutional layer, and to which layers should that particular convolutional layer be connected to. We also want to optimize the learning strategy and the respective hyperparameters. For example, if you should use backpropagation, ADAM, and on top of that, what is the most suited learning rate for that particular network, and so on. And also, we can optimize any other hyperparameters, such as data augmentation strategy and the respective hyperparameters, and any other hyperparameters that are required by the neural network, such as, for example, the data preprocessing strategy. As I've mentioned in the previous slide, this is a grammar-based approach, and as such, the search space is defined by means of a context-free grammar. This particular slide depicts a grammar for the design of convolutional neural networks, and as such, and as you probably know, the structure of the convolutional neural networks is often divided in two main parts. In the first one, we extract features, and for that, we resort to convolutional and pooling layer, and in the second part, we perform classification based, in this case, on the fully connected layer. To define the layer parameters, we also do that by means of the context-free grammar, and as such, we can define which are the parameters, what is their type, and the minimum and maximum range for their values. For example, for the pooling layer, we have three particular parameters, which are the kernel size, the stride, and the padding, and obviously the pooling type. The kernel size is an integer with one value that can range between 1 and 5. The stride is also an integer with one value that can range between 1 and 3. And the padding and pooling type are closed choice parameters which can have specific values. For example, the pooling type can be either average or maximum, and the padding, according to the Keras implementation, can be same or valid. We can also evolve as we've seen the learning strategy. However, in this particular example, we've fixed the learning strategy to a gradient descent strategy with a learning rate of 0.01 and a momentum value of 0.9. However, this can also be defined by means of production rules and as such be target of evolution. An example of a genotype and a phenotype is depicted on this particular slide. As we've seen, we can also evolve the connections, and that is what the first level of genotype refers to. The -1 stands for a connection of this specific level to the input layer, and then we have the indexing based on an array-like structure. For example, the features can connect to the layer indexed by 0, which is the previous one, and this one can connect to the layers indexed by 1 and -1, which are 1 for the previous layer and -1 for the input. Then we have the outer layer where we encode the non-terminal symbol of the grammar that should be used as the initial symbol for expanding the production rules. In this case, we have a layer corresponding to features, and we have the same for 3 consecutive evolutionary units, and then we have classification, the output, which is a softmax layer, and also the learning strategy. And then in the inner level, we have the hyperparameters corresponding to the layers in the outer level. For example, for this particular layer, we have a features, which is encoded by the non-terminal. The first expansion is the 1, which corresponds to a pooling layer, and then the pooling layer has a kernel size of 4, a stride of 2, and also is a pooling type of 1, which is, in our case, pooling type of 1 corresponds to a max pooling, and a padding of 0, which corresponds to same. And as you can see the mapping to the phenotype, which in this case corresponds to this particular set of layers. And as we've seen for the particular one where we have the inner level, we have the pooling connected to 2 layers, which are the previous one and the input. So what have we done on top of this? To extend fast answer to incremental development, in essence, we take advantage of the best models that are evolved for solving previous tasks. And as such, this knowledge can be incorporated either in the generation of the initial population or in the mutation operator. For the initial population, what we do is to form the population by taking advantage of the models or of the evolutionary units that are part of the best evolved solutions. And as such, the individuals in the initial population can be either formed by, in the case of convolutional networks, by copying all the feature layer from the best solutions and generating at random the classification layers, or randomly generating at random the feature layers and copying all the classification layers, or randomly generating all the layers even for the classification for the features and only copying the learning strategy, or any other possible combination of copying and generating at random any of the evolutionary units. I've told you before, we can also introduce knowledge in the mutation operator. And for that, what we do is we modify the mutation operator of the answer that duplicates evolutionary units to enable the copy not only from the evolutionary units that are already part of the genotype of the individual, but also by enabling the copy to be performed from evolutionary units that are from the best candidate solutions evolved for previous problems. To investigate the performance of this approach, we seek the evolution of convolutional neural networks for 4 particular benchmarks, in particular the NIST, the SVHM, the Fashion NIST, and the Cypher10 datasets. As you may know, the NIST and Fashion NIST datasets are grayscale 28 by 28 images, whereas the SVH1 and Cypher10 datasets are 32 by 32 RGB images, and as such, what we've done to normalize the dataset is to convert the grayscale to RGB 32 by 32 images. So to convert from a grayscale to RGB model, we replicate the gray channel 3 times, and to reshape the images from 28 by 28 to 32 by 32, we apply the nearest neighbor method. And from these datasets, we build 3 different setups. That is, we perform incremental development from NIST to SVHN, because we are talking about two datasets where we want to classify numbers. We also do 2 other benchmarks, which are NIST SVHN Fashion NIST and NIST SVHN Cypher10. That is 2 datasets that are incrementally built in 2 steps, and which, from our experience, have different complexities in terms of the end task. In this slide, we depict the differences in performance from the non-incremental to incremental approaches. The non-incremental approaches are marked in red, whereas the non-incremental approaches are marked in red and the incremental are marked in gray. As we see in this slide, the average test performance, which in this case is the accuracy, is always superior when we perform the evolution incrementally. In particular, for the NIST SVHN Fashion setup and for the NIST SVHN Cypher10 setups, which essentially are this and this, the performance is statistically, the difference in the performance is statistically significant. For this one, the performance is not significant, and the reason we hypothesize for that is because learning NIST is easy, as it is an easy to solve problem, and as such not much knowledge is gathered from solving it, and that's the reason why the difference in performance is not that noticeable. In addition to measuring the performance in average, because we are talking about an evolutionary computation evolutionary cycle, and as such we have to perform several runs, we also focus on the analysis of the best performance, because in the last scenario, what we want is to know what is the model that performs best, and that is the one that is going to be deployed live. So here we observe exactly the same trends, and with a remarkable result that the difference is most noticeable in the Cypher10 dataset, which is also the most challenging one. However, in these experiments, we focus the analysis by evolving for the same amount of generations. But we haven't focused the analysis of the structure of the individuals. And that's what we do in this particular slide. We focus a particular run, and for that run we analyze how the structure of the layers is evolving for the feature layers. So the B, C, P, that is, the letters correspond to layers, and the B corresponds to batch normalization, the C corresponds to convolutional layer, the P corresponds to pooling, and D is a dropout. As we've seen, the initial population, that is the best individual in the first generation, is composed by copying all the layers from the SVHN dataset, which is the point that we are transferring from. That is, this is a run from the NIST SVHN Cypher10 dataset, and as such, in the first generation, the best individual is the one that copied all the layers from the previous evolutionary step, which is the SVHN dataset. Then, as generations proceed, we see that the layers are starting to be adapted to this particular problem, which is the Cypher10, and even in some later in evolution, it is possible to introduce another layer that comes from another dataset, which in this case is from the NIST dataset, but so on and so forth. We see that the layers that are initially copied from one that was highly effective in solving another dataset are continuously adapted to tackle a new challenge, which in this case is the cipher dataset, and that this speeds up evolution and helps attaining more effective results and networks. On top of that, we also analyze the robustness and generalization ability of the generated models. And for that, what we do is we take a dataset and check its performance on all the datasets that were not evolved for that particular setup. That is, in the rows we have the setup, and on the columns we have the datasets. For example, for the mnist SVHN, we measure the performance on all datasets that are not seen during evolution, that is on fashion and cipher 10. And for mnist SVHN fashion, we measure the performance on cipher 10. And SVHN, and the same for mnist SVHN cipher 10. And what we've seen here is that the results that came out from incremental development are the ones that consistently obtain higher results for datasets that they have not seen previously. This is a remarkable result and proves that the incremental development does not only help speeding up evolution, but it also helps generating networks that are more robust and that later on can tackle problems that are more challenging and even that they have not seen yet. So what we can say in conclusion is that, first of all, we have extended fast answer to incremental development, and that the results that the networks that are evolved by incremental development statistically outperform the canonical approach. It is the fast answer implementation without any incremental steps. We've also acknowledged that incremental development does not only help generating higher performing results, but it does also help speeding up evolution. And later, as we've seen from the result where we analyze the layers, we acknowledge that the method works as expected in terms of evolution. That is, first of all, we started by a result that was highly fit to a previous problem, but that can also solve the new one, and that new approach is adapted over time to better deal with our new dataset. And finally, the deep artificial neural networks that are generated and evolved by incremental development generalize better than those obtained by non-incremental approaches. As future work, we want to apply our incremental development methodology to a wider set of tasks and domains, not only restricted to computer vision. We also want to extend the approach to modular evolution, because instead of transferring only a given layer, it may be better to transfer a set of them that are known to work well when in conjunction. And also we want to seek ways to transfer not only the evolutionary unit, but also the weights. Because so far we are transferring evolutionary units, and at a certain point we can be transferring the learning strategy. However, all the weights are not transferred from one problem to the other, and as such we also have to retrain the whole network again for each new problem. That is it. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach me by email. Thanks.
So, hello, it's Nuno. So please, if you have questions, please come forward and ask me, and write them on the chat, or if you want, you can speak. So we have already two questions. The first one is by Douglas Diaz, and did you code your GE or use any library? Well, we used our one library that we have available online for our method, for our grammatical part of the algorithm. In concrete, it is based on structured grammatical evolution. So yeah, we have used one library. In fact, all the code for this is available. I will put the link in the chat after the questions, and we also have the link on the paper, so you can consult the code and the results deeper. So we have another question by James Foster. The question is, I'm interested in the actual solutions you have found. So the first part of the question is, how do your topologies look compared to those done the traditional way? Okay, so I'm going to answer this one, and then I'm going to answer the other one. One thing that we observed is that the layers or the structure tends to be a little different in terms of the number of feature layers that are required. Specifically, for instance, what happens is that the parameterizations that we see in the incremental ones are really different from the ones that we see in the evolved from scratch. And what we think is that since the numerical parameters for the convolutional layers, for instance, are much more tuned, we don't need additional layers of convolutional to extract the features. Okay. So they are different, and they tend to be a little, let me say, I'm going to use the term simpler, but it's not simpler that I want to say. It's they are smaller, let's say. And the second part of the James Foster question is, what kind of features are your hidden layers finding? In particular, given that your solution generalized, what kind of features are appropriate to generalization? Well, that's something that my answer to is, we don't know yet. We didn't look at the features, so I'm assuming that you are talking about what kind of about the way they if they find lines, curves. So we didn't look at that kind of things yet. So we should. Thank you for your question slash suggestion. So we have another questions by Mark Schoenauer. So did you try to transfer from the well-known best architectures, VGG, ResNet, etc., after describing them in the grammar? Well, we didn't. And the reason why we didn't, and we probably should have, but the reason we did not do this was basically because we wanted our reasoning was, how could evolution help finding some or discovering something in let's say a simpler problem, and how could we transferred this knowledge that was evolved in that simple problem to a much more difficult one. It was basically like the idea of how we learn. So we start learning in basic schools, simple math and so on and so forth. And as we progress in school, we start to learn more difficult subjects. And our idea was this. Taking on what you are saying, I'm thinking that, okay, imagine that you are already in the 9th grade. How can you evolve from 9th grade? I think that's what I'm reading from your question. and that should be something that, it's something that we can try to explore. Not sure if I answered your question. Thank you very much. So any more questions? Don't be shy. Well, I cannot make a question to myself, but if you have any more questions, please let me know. Also, you have the paper, you have our address. I'm going to leave the link for the code, and we will be available in the poster session as well. So thank you for listening.